Open Minds Media.
Indiana County 911. My brother's gone. Can you be a little more specific, sir? He took my brother. Who took him? I don't know who took him. I don't know what. Sir, take a breath. Explain to me what happened.
And I looked out and there was this big red blinking UFO.
I can just say this. Something's going on in the woods. Something's going on.
They're not dogs, they're not coyotes. What could it be, right?
I had an encounter with a skunk ape, and it completely altered the course of my life.
I found a skull. Are you guys going to want to come build this?
Put him out.
I just see it.
Sightings of a UFO hovering over a barn.
Millie woke up from a dream, and when I went into the bedroom, she said, "There's a monster on the wall."
They saw that the creature had run through a barbed wire fence. They were able to obtain hairs. They sent the hairs to their lab, and it came back as an unknown creature.
Bizarre Encounters with Shayn Orin.
What is up, bizarreites, and welcome back to the most bizarre show on the internet. I am the one that one person calls Shane Squatch.
And I am the big bad Boo Daddy, Orin Felix.
The biggest, baddest of the Boo Daddies.
Booiest?
The booiest Boo Daddy.
Yeah.
The leader of the bizarreites.
No, I guess that would be you.
Well, it'd be both of us, right? We're co-hosts, so that's how it works. We're co-leaders.
Okay. It's like an assistant to the co-leader.
I wouldn't even go that far.
Situation.
You know how some shows there's the host and then there's the co-host? I feel like we're just each other's co-hosts. We're both equally the host and we're both equally the co-host. So maybe we should just say host instead of co-host. I don't know. Whatever sounds better, man.
That is just too progressive and cute.
He's my co-host partner. He's my host partner.
Okay, and moving right on. News and updates, Shane. Why don't you tell everybody some of the stuff we got cooking up over here?
So first and foremost, since everybody caught on the last episode that we did a logo update, as everybody can also see on the feed, they can see on the new cover art, we totally recovered all that stuff, brand new cover art, brand new logo, all that fun stuff. Hopefully we'll have a new theme song coming soon too, so we can totally give the show a revamp. But with, of course, that new logo, as I was mentioning last week, I was going to update the Open Minds Media merch store to have the new logo on it. So now the old logo is no longer on the merch store. We have the updated one. So if anybody wants to scoop some awesome Bizarre Encounter swag, we would greatly appreciate it. And if you guys happen to pick some up and you guys don't mind taking a picture of yourself wearing it, so we could repost on social media, I'd also greatly appreciate it. And for those of you who aren't necessarily into wearing podcast logos, I also, as I've mentioned on a lot of different shows, do a lot of other merch designs that are just pertaining to cryptids and all that other fun stuff. So the newest one that I've released is this new design that kind of looks like a sports logo with Mothman with the claws up and everything. And it says Mothman across the bottom. It's supposed to go in with the same line, if you want to say, that I did the Dogman shirt, and I have a couple other ones that I'm working on for that. But yeah, brand new merch, updated hats and all that stuff for Bizarre Encounters, and the brand new Mothman design that I have as a t-shirt, or you guys can pick it up as a sticker.
So another piece of news and updates should be tomorrow, February 6th at 7:15 Eastern Time. We'll be having our first live episode of Bizarre Inquiries. That's going to be on the Open Minds Media YouTube channel. So look out for a link on social media probably the day before. It's going to be a full 1 hour show, hopefully. So you guys be sure to submit questions, clips, articles, anything like that you guys want us to inquire about.
Looking forward to hopefully having you guys pop into the chat. We can hopefully get a little community going around that show. So, feel free, get comfortable, get some popcorn, set it up on your TV, on your YouTube, whatever you guys want to do. Just come and chill with us and inquire with us about some bizarre inquiries. And another sad side note, with me trying to do a little bit more on with the front end of the show, trying to make it so that we have a little bit more active stuff on YouTube. I want to get into doing some more short form videos for TikTok and YouTube, doing clips, all that extra kind of stuff. So I will be dropping the Telegram, at least for now. So just a heads up to anybody that is on there. It's not super duper active all the time, so I just figured it's probably one of those things just cut ties with temporarily, at least, so I can focus on other stuff to keep growing up the community. So for anybody that's liked being involved in the Telegram, I apologize. It may come back with popular demand at at some point. But yes, that will be shutting down probably within the next week or so that we can focus more on doing some videos type stuff for you guys. And like I said, even just clips and stuff like that on YouTube. I want to make sure that we got more content for you guys on the front end.
And if you guys want to get a hold of us for any reason whatsoever, Shayn, tell them how they can do that.
Number one, you guys can email us at bizarreencounters@outlook.com. Or you guys can also get a hold of us through social media. Instagram and Facebook are the ones that we are the most active on. Or you guys can also get a hold of us through the submission form, which is available on the link tree, of course. Right up at the top says contact us. Or past that, you guys can also call or text our hotline. That number is 313-364-1551. And just trying to expand that a little bit. I was originally just intending to use that for encounters, but if anybody wants to basically like call into the show until we start getting everything live going, maybe that'll even be the number we use if we want to, start doing some call-ins or something like that as Bizarre Inquiry starts to evolve a bit more. But that being said, if anybody wants to call into the show to say how much they enjoy the show, to say, something funny about the show, make some comments on something, maybe even give somebody like a birthday shout out or something, everything that you guys call into that number gets recorded on there so I can bring it onto the show. So if you guys want to, give a shout out or something on the show, feel free to also call into that number for that too.
And as always, all of the shit we've mentioned is in the link tree in the show description.
And today for you guys, we are back with the Bizarre Encounters that you guys have learned to appreciate and enjoy. We've been doing a lot of guest episodes lately, but we said that we would have some of our deep dives into the mix here. So luckily today, again, diving back into that awesome Bizarre Encounter stuff that you guys crave with us just getting unhinged on random topics. Today, Orin has put one together for you guys. So without further ado, Orin, why don't you let them know a little bit about what we're getting into today?
All right. So as you guys know from clicking on the episode, today we're going to be talking about like the Lost Colony, Roanoke Colony, whatever you guys want to call it.
Not the American Horror Story one, like the good one.
Well, we're going to touch on that a little bit. But so before I get started, I do want to give a quick shout out to our buddy Kevin from the Where the Weird Ones Are podcast. A couple months ago, he invited me to come on for one of his Conspiracy Tuesday episodes and talk about the Lost Colony. So I had some kind of rough notes from that. And, I was thinking this is not something we've really talked about at all on this show. So I kind of polished these up a little bit and added some stuff to it. And I figured I would share it with you guys. So y'all definitely go check out that Conspiracy Tuesday episode with Kevin at Where the Weird Ones Are. If you have not listened to it, that's a little more of like a free flowing conversational type setting than this is going to be. But
if you guys are into some bizarre shit, then go and try his hot sauce too, because he's got some bizarre flavors. I just want to throw that in there. I didn't mean to interrupt you, but try Kevin's hot sauce. It's great.
Yeah, it's very hot. But anyway, so if you listen to this and that episode, it'll kind of give you a different flavor for the material. But anyway, unless you've got anything else, Shayn, I'm going to jump in.
I am ready, sir, to see where you've gone with these notes exactly.
All right, so I'm going to kind of breeze through the more historical aspects of this as much as I can. This is not a colonial history program. This is a bizarre program. So we're going to kind of just hit the high points of the history, and then we're going to get into more like theories and stuff like that as we go on.
You got to set the framework, as you always say, right?
That's right.
You can't talk about weird history unless you first set the actual history.
That's right. And we're going all the way back to 1584 for this one. So there was an English nobleman and explorer whose name was Sir Walter Raleigh. And so he was kind of tasked with putting together like an exploratory expedition to the Americas. And this was to find like a suitable location for a permanent English settlement or colony in the Americas. So on April 27th of 1584, two British ships landed on the coast of what is now known as Roanoke Island, North Carolina. And this is located like 20 miles north of Hatteras Island, if you guys have ever heard of that. It's in Dare County, which is like on the North Carolina Outer Banks. So if you guys have ever seen like the white stickers with like OBX, that's this. And like all the North Carolina lighthouses, that's that area. This is what it's talking about. So after making landfall, these explorers discovered several Native American villages and tribes. And actually, when they returned to England, they brought two of the natives back with them, and their names were Manteo and Wanchese. And both of those guys have towns on the Outer Banks named after them today, which I think is pretty cool. But anyway, so when they got back to England, Queen Elizabeth I was like impressed with, the tales that the explorers told, and she was impressed with the natives they brought back. So she approved of this site for the colony, and this was going to be the first permanent English colony in North America. And so she approved of all that, and she appointed Sir Walter Raleigh as the chief lord of this new territory, which chief lord is a great title. Like, if we weren't already the big bad boo daddy and, Shane Squatch, somebody needs to be chief lord.
Chief lord. Look at this guy. This guy is definitely a chief lord. Look at that little earring and everything, man. Like,
so, and kind of the funny thing about that is North Carolina's capital city, where I live, is called Raleigh after this guy.
I was literally about to make that connection. I was about to ask if it was named after him.
Yeah, definitely. All right. So Sir Walter Raleigh planned a second expedition. And on July 27th of 1585, so the next year, 7 ships that were carrying 150 men, including the 2 natives who they brought with them the first go-round, they arrived back on Roanoke Island. And this time, a former military officer named Ralph Lane was appointed governor of the new colony. And so as soon as I got there, this guy immediately began construction on a fort and several shelters and dwellings for the soldiers. But, it didn't take very long that they started clashing with the local tribes. And reportedly, this Ralph Lane guy even burned down an entire village, quote, over a misunderstanding about a silver cup. So that must have been one hell of a silver cup.
Hey man, it's the what's the name of that thing? It's the Fountain of Youth or something. It's the specific cup you have to drink out of to get the Fountain of Youth to work. Like
some Pirates of the Caribbean shit.
That's why nobody can find it. There, you have to have both aspects. You can't just have the water, or you can't just have the cup. You have to have both, and that's why nobody's figured it out.
Yeah, because they burned down the village because of the cup. There you go. You just cracked the code. So anyway, jumping back in. So between kind of these tensions with the natives and, continual delays for supply ships, these colonists were kind of becoming ornery and irritated and desperate. And on June 9th of 1586, an English privateer and explorer named Sir Francis Drake, which a lot of people might have heard of, he landed on Roanoke Island with a fleet of 23 ships. And many of these original colonists, including Ralph Lane himself, returned to England with this fleet. So basically, Ralph Lane came and stirred shit up with the natives and burned down their villages and then took his ball and went home.
That's so fucked up, man. That's it seems like that is literally if you had to simplify how the Americas got conquered, that's pretty much it. They came, they burned it down, they set some colony up, and then they left.
And ironically, these supply ships that they're waiting on arrived just 15 days after all these guys left. So that's just another little wrinkle to it that makes it extra funny, I think. All right, so this next section is kind of where we get into the meat of the story. So in 1587, Sir Walter Raleigh planned a third expedition. And this one was to be governed by a guy named John White. And whereas the first one, was more military in makeup, this one, they included women and children. So there was 117 people in total. And this included John White's pregnant daughter, Eleanor, and her husband, I believe it would be pronounced Annius Dare. So this new group of colonists, they set about kind of rebuilding the abandoned fort and the shelters and everything. And they kind of started establishing a truce with the local tribes. But spoiler alert, this truce was kind of short-lived as well.
I mean, you can't expect a truce to last that long because no matter what, they're coming to this area. They say, all right, we're going to take this area. The natives say, okay, fine. But then very quickly after that, they start saying, all right, we're going to take this area. We're going to take this area. Or they're going to say like, oh, it's for all of us. But then they're going to sit behind their fort walls and say, but you guys stay back. This is our area. I thought we were going to share the land.
Disease and didn't know how to grow food. And yeah, so just a very untenable situation. Like you said, colonization in a nutshell, pretty much.
Purposely spreading disease too, because there was the whole thing with a lot of them that they would like, basically get infected blankets and give them to the natives and just spread sickness. Like that's biological warfare. That's like the origin of it right there.
In its earliest, purest form. So, but
hey,
so
sick people, just rub on these blankets so we can give them to the natives, please.
On August the 18th of 1587, Eleanor gave birth to a daughter, and they named this little girl Virginia Dare. And so the state of Virginia is named after this baby. And she was the first English child to be born in North America. And a few days after Virginia Dare's birth, John White, who again was like the governor and her grandfather, returned to England to request additional supplies and like military support for the colony since they're having all these ongoing issues with the natives. So before John White left, he told the colonists like if they had to leave the colony under duress or anything bad happened, to carve a cross into a tree so he, it would be a sign to him, he'd know what happened. So this was kind of when there's like ongoing war with the Spanish. So John White's return to Roanoke was delayed for like over 3 years. And when he finally returned, he found like no sign of the colonists, and it looked like the fort and all the shelters had actually been like disassembled and moved. And this is kind of the piece that most people know about this story. So he found the word Croatoan, Croatoan, carved into a tree. And he found another tree nearby that had the letters CRO carved into it. But there was no cross carved on either tree. So this led John White to kind of assume that the colony had voluntarily relocated to a nearby island where the Croatan tribe lived. But Croatan is spelled Croatan. So people have kind of debated the spelling, whether that was a misspelling or a message or what's going on there. But anyway, this Croatan Island where the tribe lived is today known as Hatteras Island.
Just to throw this in here too, not that there is a connection, but maybe there is, I don't know. But the one tree that said CRO, I mean, maybe they're spelling Croatoan, or on the other side, he said to leave a cross, CRO, you're only missing 2 S's and you'd have the word cross. I mean, yeah, maybe there's something there. Maybe there's
they
not.
Just went a little too literally with leave a cross on the tree.
The natives or something like heard them say leave a cross on the tree and they were just like, cross? Okay.
Yeah, I don't know.
They ran them out and they just want to be like, all right, they're left so that we don't have any more issues with anybody else coming back. They'll just assume they left.
So kind of rounding out this section, John White, of course, wanted to go and explore this Croatan Island and try to find his family and the colonists and whatnot. But like this horrible storm rolled in, and the ship's captain basically like demanded that they leave immediately and set sail for the West Indies. So John White died a few years later, and he never saw his family again. So that's kind of the long and the short of the historical aspects. Do you have anything to throw in before we move on to the next section?
Well, I don't know if I want to throw in too many theories yet, but I mean, definitely one possible theory would definitely be the fact that, they maybe got ran off out of the area, and not that you could actually go back and look for these bodies, or, considering the time that it wasn't easy just to go out in the woods and look for like bodies, for example. They call it the Lost Colony and say that nobody was ever found from it, but who knows? Maybe if they would have went like half a mile into the woods, maybe they would have found some bodies. Who knows? I mean, maybe they got ran off, and I mean, even if they came back a couple weeks later and this would have happened, I mean, it's in the woods. I mean, animals would have eaten it. So, I mean, there definitely is a very high possibility of natives coming in, ambushing them, running them off, killing them off into the woods, and then animals just taking the carcasses, and then that was the end of that.
Yeah, we're kind of going to get into that with the thoughts and theories and whatnot, but
I figured I'd leave the historical theory in with the historical portion.
Well, we're going to hit kind of historical, more, normal quote unquote theories, and then we're going to get a little bizarre as we go on.
Hold on tight, guys. We're going to take a quick commercial break, but
if you guys want to stay up to date with the show, Follow Bizarre Encounters on Instagram and Facebook, and Open Minds Media on YouTube, Telegram, and the TikToks.
Now feel free to fast forward through these commercials so we can get back into the show. And now back to the show.
I thought this would be a good place to throw this in. There is a local legend that kind of attempts to explain what became of Virginia Dare and the colonists. So according to this legend, there was Chief Manteo of the Croatan tribe, and he had a rival who was Chief Wanchese, which those are the two names of the guys who they took over to England with them. So kind of fun fact there.
Is it them to begin with, and then they eventually became chiefs?
See, I'm not sure. I think this is kind of one of those Game of Telephone type stories where, obviously, I think Manteo was a chief. I'm not sure about Wanchese, this other guy. And truth be told, I didn't dig super duper deep into like their lineages and whatnot. But I think this is probably one of those stories where there's a nugget of truth in there, but there's a lot of kind of creative liberties taken.
I mean, considering though, that would maybe be a good grounds for somebody becoming a chief. Maybe, when they went with them originally, they weren't chiefs, but when they came back, they knew how to interact with the white settlers. So, that seems to be a good grounds for somebody becoming chief if they can make a means of communication between like the colonists and everybody coming in. So I definitely think that trip would be a good reason for them to eventually have become chiefs.
Yeah. And like we said, there's towns to this day named after these guys. So it would totally make sense.
Or maybe it's one of those things too, where if it stays in the family, it's, like the name continues on.
Yeah.
It's like one of those weird things that they talk about with like the legacy of like an emperor or a king or whatever that, rather than, like have a whole new name to the king, if it's like the same family lineage, you'll still go by the same name. So it like adds on to the legacy of that one king name.
Yeah.
Or chief name.
Totally makes sense to me. But anyway, so according to this legend, Chief Manteo learned that his rival, Chief Wanchese, was going to attack the Roanoke colony. And so Manteo was kind of friendly with the colonists and whatnot. And so he warned them and kind of whisked them away to live in his village. And this included Virginia Dare. And so these colonists, including Virginia Dare, were kind of integrated into his tribe. And Virginia Dare grew up to be, this beautiful young woman. And since she was, exotic to these natives, she attracted a lot of male attention and had a lot of suitors. And her two main suitors were a young brave and an old medicine man.
What a range. She's into the young ones and the old ones. Got the young buck and the old calf.
Exactly. And she chose the young buck. And this did not sit well with the old calf. So the medicine man was furious. And in retaliation, he cast a spell, or in some versions of the story, brewed a potion and tricked her into drinking it. But either way, she was transformed into a white deer.
Sounds like a Disney story.
Kind of, sort of, but
they made Pocahontas. Why didn't they make this? And then totally
we're gonna talk about that in a minute.
Bastardize it, but
yeah,
it seems like it has the grounds for becoming a Disney story.
yeah. You got anthropomorphic animals and woodland creatures and all sorts of shit.
Somebody getting turned into a deer, and they gotta do this long journey to become human again.
Well, that's part of the story.
This is the true origin of Bambi.
Yeah, but maybe even more fucked up. So Virginia Dare, once she was turned into this deer, she was, of course, terrorized by her new appearance, and she ran deep into the woods. And soon after this, hunters began to see this strange white deer roaming around the woods, but they were always unable to kill it. And they said that it seemed to be, quote, more spirit than real. And so the young brave, who was the best hunter in the village, he set out to kill this mysterious white deer. And this is where things get kind of interesting. He planned to use silver-tipped arrows because this old seasoned hunter had told him that, quote, only silver-tipped arrows could bring down a spirit deer. And this is straight werewolf lore, which I thought was kind of cool.
Doesn't this partially kind of play into some of the Snarly Owl lore too, which is really just north of that? Because I had Dave on Inquiries recently, and he said there's not just the black dog, but a lot of people report this headless white dog that's also mixed in with the Snarly Owl legend. So it's well,
and it's funny that, and that's one of the reasons I included this direct quote, more spirit than real, because when we were doing our Snarly Owl research, there's like pretty much that exact same quote that people use to describe the Snarly Owl. So no, I thought the exact same thing. I didn't put it in the notes because I didn't know if it would be, one jump too far to make, but I'm glad you brought it up. So,
I mean, if there's something special with the area, I mean, maybe there's something where it's like, how do I even just try to describe this? Like, either one, animal spirits somehow get preserved in the area to be these.
We're
like,
going to talk about
creatures.
that in a second too.
So maybe that could partially explain the Snarly Yow stuff. Maybe they were like huntsman dogs that were coming from like, over in England and stuff, for example. Or on the other side, maybe it's a matter of like, in this particular area, like human spirits, they need to learn a lesson, get converted into animal spirits to learn those lessons. And maybe that's why there's so many of these weird sightings of these like animal spirits.
Keep that one on the back burner. We're going to come right back to that in just a few minutes.
Well, I'll let you go then before I keep going with it.
All right. So this young brave, he stalked the deer like deep into the woods, and eventually the deer stopped to take a drink from a stream, and the brave shot it with one of the silver-tipped arrows. And as soon as the arrow hit the deer, it let out like a human scream. And the brave realized that it wasn't a deer, but was like actually a human that had been bewitched in some way. And at this point, like a gray mist began enveloping the deer, and it was returned to Virginia Dare, its human form. And so the brave, who was obviously in love with Virginia Dare before she got turned into the deer, he ran up to where she lay and he held her as she died, and then supposedly, in some versions of the story, he took her back and buried her like on the site of the original colony.
Sounds like some Romeo and Juliet type shit.
Yeah, star-crossed lovers. But anyway, so people say that there's still tales of ghostly white deers seen on Hatteras Island today, and a lot of locals believe, or say anyway, that it's the spirit of Virginia Dare still haunting the island. So that's just kind of a fun little story, piece of folklore that ties into all this, and I thought we'd knock that out before theories and all that fun stuff. So you got anything to add?
I mean, it just seems like like I was kind of mentioning, there's this thing with like animal spirits in that area, but there's always this connection with like humans to the area. So it's like there's either one side of it. It's particularly in this story, they mentioned like the shamanistic aspect, and maybe that does play a big portion of it. Or on the other side, there is just something special about the land where, if you don't learn your lesson from the land, like, you're going to become this like animal spirit or something. But it doesn't seem like most of these animal spirits are like malevolent. Like they're very like, even Snarly Yow. I mean, he's usually seen near like roads and stuff like that, but usually it's like keeping people away from an area. So it's not necessarily like hurting anybody or like, other than somebody that goes to hit it with their car and they maybe hit like a tree or something like that. But it's more so just like pushing you away from the area. Like they're not these like evil type spirits. It's just the matter of being misunderstood. So people see this ghostly thing and assume it's something evil, but I feel like it's definitely something different than that.
And we're going to get into that in just a second. But before we do that, we're going to talk about some more kind of down to earth theories. So the two kind of prevalent theories to explain what happened to the Roanoke colonists is that they either assimilated with or were, slaughtered, genocided, whatever, by one of the local tribes. And when the Jamestown settlement was established in Virginia, which is not that far from here, in 1607, Captain John Smith of, the Pocahontas story, asked the locals what became of the Roanoke colonists, and allegedly he was told that the colonists had split into two groups, and one of them was killed by the Powhatan tribe, and the other group still lived nearby. So John Smith kind of went on a search for these remaining colonists, but he never found any evidence of them. But it's kind of interesting because in this area, reports of like native tribes interacting with, quote, pale skin, blonde haired people date back to like at least the 1600s. So this has been going on a long time where these people had stories and accounts of interacting with European looking people. And like even today, the Pembroke tribe of Native Americans are known to have blue eyes and light hair and like fair skin. So a lot of people kind of speculate, assume whatever, that these are the descendants of the original Roanoke colonists.
I mean, even the Cherokee, too, that's just a little bit more down south. I mean, all the tribes that were on that East Coast, they all got mixed in pretty quickly with like the white colonists. So even looking at like somebody that's Cherokee today, even if you're like 100%, like my grandma was 100%, but she had a lighter skin complexion than she had like a darker native, like what people would assume to be like a native skin complexion. You start getting over towards like the West, and those ones were the last ones that really had that mixing in. So like they still maintain that like native darkened skin color, but on the East Coast, yeah, it lightened up pretty quickly. So I mean, like, you know, from the time they originally came there to say this in 1607, that's like a 20, 30 year gap. So, I mean, like at that point, somebody had already been living with them for like 20, 30 years. And knowing that at this time, you know, people's life expectancy was maybe like 40 to 60, somewhere in that area.
Theoretically could have had a couple generations worth of intermingling at that point, you know? Yeah,
you would have at least been one generation down. And most of the people that were around for the Roanoke thing could have already been passed by then, or, you know, they're already living with these people for like 20, 30 years. Like they maybe just didn't have an interest because they were like, all right, I could go back to this where we're struggling, or I can be over here with them where we're thriving and we're all a family now because we've been living together for 30 years. So they may not have even have wanted to come back at that point.
Well, and we talked about the whole, you know, spreading disease thing. I mean, I'm no biologist, but it seems to me that, you know, people who had more European traits would be more immune to these kind of European diseases, and they would have maybe stuck around a little more than the indigenous people who were just decimated by this shit, you know?
I mean, even on the other side, too, I mean, the natives could have purposely wanted to reproduce with them because they knew that, you know, these white people don't get this sickness. You know, maybe if we have their genes within our genes, then we won't get this sickness, or our kids won't get this sickness. Some very basic entry level, you know, like biology, but I'm sure that back then people probably still had an idea of that, thinking that, you know, there's something special about these people where they don't get sick. So maybe we should intermingle with them because then maybe our kids from them won't get sick. So, I mean, like that could have been part of the mix too.
Yeah, absolutely. So, I mean, obviously that's the prevailing theory. I think it's probably the most likely. But kind of some of the other more down to earth theories are that the colony was attacked by Spanish forces. Like I said earlier, this was kind of during a big time of conflict between England and Spain. Another theory is that they were intentionally abandoned there in a conspiracy to undermine Sir Walter Raleigh. And I'm not going to get into all the specifics of why people speculate this, but basically it's just like this Catholic versus Protestant feud that was going on at the time. And some people, even say that they could have attempted to sail back to England, either with some sort of vessel that they made themselves, or, you know, from something that was abandoned from one of the previous voyages.
That would make sense on why some of the buildings were half assembled then. Maybe it was a matter of the reason they were never found is because the ship got lost at sea, or, you know, there was the bad weather that was directly after when they were talking about when they were coming to look for them. You know, maybe that bad weather could have played a mix in with this somewhere too, where the ship just didn't end up making it.
Yeah. I mean, if you're trying to sail across the Atlantic Ocean in a homemade boat, you know, that makes sense why they never found anything.
I mean, it makes sense both ways, because it's like, when these people would come, the first thing that they would take apart in order to build houses was the ship, because they knew that they wouldn't need the ship again. So assumably it would go back the same way, that if you knew that you needed to make a ship to leave, you would just take your buildings back apart because those were the original pieces from the ship in the first place. But, you know, if you're using them to build a house, there's some extra holes in it, there's some extra spots, you know, the wood isn't going to be as strong as it was the first time.
Together. I mean, putting shit together again is always more difficult than it is the first time. So.
And when it has the marking holes from the original ship and now the buildings from it. Better hope that you what did they use? That they used rope and tar to pack in the holes. Maybe somebody missed a couple holes.
They probably just used bubble gum.
Tree sap? I think that's what they would have used as gum back then, right?
All right, y'all, we got to take a break and pay some bills.
But if you guys hate ads, well, you guys can get ad-free and early access on Patreon for just $1 a month. And it's a great way to support the show. And if you'd like to get some extra video content and merch store discounts, there are a few other tiers with additional benefits with 7-day free trials available for most.
And now back to the show. All right, so this is kind of one more like down to earth thing that I didn't have a good place to throw it in, so I thought this was as good as place as any. But from 1937 to 1941, there was a series of engraved rocks that became known as the Dare stones, like Virginia Dare, and they were discovered all across the southern United States, mostly like North Carolina, South Carolina, Georgia. But anyway, the first stone was found near the Chowan River, which is kind of like South Virginia, North Carolina, in that area. And it was found by a man named Lewis E. Hammond. And this stone weighed 21 pounds, and it allegedly featured a message that was carved from Eleanor Dare to her father, John White. And supposedly this message on the stone describes like a mass grave that contained the bodies of the Roanoke colonists. So when this was discovered, it kind of set off like a bit of a media firestorm. It went viral before that was a thing. And it led for like to an extensive search for more stones. So in the years that followed, more than 40 additional alleged stones were claimed to be found. And these stones like allegedly detailed like the Roanoke colonists migrating from the original site to somewhere near like present day Atlanta, Georgia. However, all these additional stones have basically been discredited as hoaxes and fakes. And they were ultimately linked back to a stonecutter from Georgia named Bill Eberhart. But it kind of was noted in a lot of the things I read that the authenticity of the first stone that was found by this Lewis Hammond guy, quote, has not been conclusively proven or disproven. And they say that like the style and the carvings on the original, which I believe is the picture you've got up right now, it's like drastically and noticeably different from these known forgeries.
The one stone, the one that has the cross on it over here, it says Ennius Dare and Virginia West, hence unto heaven, 1951. So if there is any validity to this, it's basically saying these people would have died in 1591?
Yeah, and supposedly, I've seen like the translation. It's in Old English, of course, but it's basically saying that these people died, and there's somewhere where there's like a mass grave for all of them. You can find the translation online, but I didn't want to bore you guys reading Old English. So.
Yeah, I just figured that part was the interesting part that stuck out to me at least, and the cross. I don't know. Yeah. That's also kind of weird with the whole like they told him to leave a cross on a tree. I know it's supposed to be like a gravestone, but I mean there is still a cross on there. There's a lot of that.
And I mean, it definitely looks old. Is it 1500s old? I don't know, but I mean, it doesn't look like it was carved in the 40s, you know?
I mean, the hard part with these stones though, is that it's like, you can't date a stone because the stones have been around forever. So it's like, if you can make the carving in it look old, then like, how would you ever really be able to tell? Even if you like, you know, carved it and then you took some mud and you dug some mud and just squished it around in there and everything, you can't date the mud. Like the stone stuff is so hard to tell because there's nothing that you can really take to carbon date it. And even when they do try to carbon date stuff that's stone, like they like the pyramids, prime example of one, they didn't take the stone, they used like little pieces of wood that they found between the stones to try to carbon date it because you can't do it with stone. So even if you do find these megalithic structures and everything, unless you find like a piece of fabric, piece of wood or something that's in between the stones, like that's the closest way you'd be able to get to maybe an idea of when this thing was made.
Well, and even if it's really an old fucking stone, that doesn't necessarily mean that the carvings are, you know?
Exactly. The carvings could have been done 2 weeks ago if you can make it look weathered enough, you know?
Yeah, exactly. But anyway, so now we're going to move on into kind of the more bizarre side of things. So we're going to start talking about like this word Croatoan that was carved into one of the trees.
Perfect time for you to bring that picture up.
yeah, exactly. So it's got a lot of like strange connections to like other weird events and disappearances throughout history. On October 3rd of 1849, the writer and poet Edgar Allan Poe, who everybody knows, was found lying semi-conscious in a gutter in Baltimore, Maryland. And he was supposedly, quote, babbling incoherently. And so they took him into the hospital. And on his deathbed, he allegedly whispered in the ear of the nurse the word Croatoan. And Poe's cause of death is still unknown. His death certificate says some really vague shit that they used to put on old timey death certificates that basically means they don't know. But anyway, some people have speculated that whatever strange ailment or malady he came down with that caused him to babble incoherently in a gutter could have happened to the Roanoke colonists, and that's why they disappeared. They all got this strange disease or sickness or whatever it was.
What if that's a name of a poison or something like that? Because I know that Edgar Allan Poe, he was, from some of the stuff I've read about him as a person, he was very much so in his own mind, and he didn't have an issue with arguing with people about stuff that he didn't agree with. So knowing that he was a confrontational individual, I mean, the poisoning could definitely have been a possibility, which has always been kind of my theory on what happened to him, was that there was foul play and somebody poisoned him. Mm-hmm. So, I mean, if that's the same being said, maybe it's something with the colonists where, maybe it's not a specific poison that they call Roanoke or that they call Croatoan, but maybe there's a mixture that they make that they call Croatoan. And that's what he was trying to say, was that this is what the mixture was or something like that. And maybe that's also what they were writing on the tree, was they were trying to say that they got poisoned by something that they were calling this, for example.
Yeah, and I think, again, that's kind of the thing that's so interesting about the word in particular, is it's the Croatan tribe, so it's one letter off, but it is different. And, could this just be as simple as a early typo that people have tried to put extra meaning into that? That's very possible, but it's also possible, like you said, that this means something entirely different, and these people knew what it meant.
I mean, it could have even been something that was a poison that that they discovered, and that's why they called it that, but one letter off. Maybe it was something that had to do with the spiritual journey, where if you take this much of it, you have a spirit, you go on the spiritual journey, the shamanistic journey. Yeah, but if you take too much of it, then it becomes a poison. You know what I mean? Maybe that kind of plays into it, that it's purposely, it has the name of the tribe in it because it has some type of spiritual significance to them.
Yeah, no, I think those are all good points. And they kind of are going to tie into some of our more spiritual, bizarre, esoteric stuff we're going to talk about here in a second. But continuing on with the whole Croatoan thing, in 1913, there was another horror writer, and his name was Ambrose Bierce, and he mysteriously disappeared while he was visiting Mexico. And allegedly, the bed he slept in the night before his disappearance had the word Croatoan carved into the bedpost. And I never saw, emphatically if this was something that was clearly there before he had stayed there, or if he carved it himself, but either way, kind of an odd connection that this would show up in Mexico.
Yeah, because I was going to say, maybe it has something to do with spirits in the land, but if this is in Mexico, then I don't know, unless there is some type of protection over a specific area, and when you do that, you have, again, getting into the more woo-woo stuff, some type of native curse that comes upon you if you...
Oh, we're getting into woo-woo native curses here in a second, so you're on the right track.
Yeah, because I think Croatoan as a word could have some type of something to do with a spell or some type of curse or something.
Yeah,
because could be a good reason why it followed to Mexico.
Yeah, that makes sense. And then, with the indigenous people of Mexico and, the Aztecs and all that kind of stuff, that's a whole new can of worms that we could open at that point.
I mean, again, even within the religious practice, we talk about this all the time on the show, that different cultures have different names for some of the same things. So, I mean, some of the deities that the people in Mexico were talking about could have been some of the same deities that the people in North America were talking about. They just had different names for them, but they're talking about the same thing. So, I mean, it's all the same land. Yeah, I mean, it's all the same land. If you put a curse on somebody, it may not matter, where you are within the Americas. You're in the Americas. These are where these deities are at,
Sit tight on that. Just a second. All right. So real quick before we get into that, though, we're going to fast forward to 1921. And there's a ship called the Carroll A. Deering, and it was found run aground off the coast of Hatteras Island, North Carolina, which again is located like 20 miles south of the Roanoke colony site. And what's interesting is when this ship was found run aground, the entire crew was missing. And the word Croatoan was allegedly written on the last page of the ship's logbook. And I thought this is kind of interesting because when we had Riley on last week and we were talking about all the Michigan Triangle stuff, this is the story I was talking about that sounded, right out of that playbook. So another one of those weird synchronicities. When have we talked about abandoned ships on this show ever? And we get 2 of them in 2 weeks.
Dude, and just in general, though, like, the thought of abandoning a ship, that means that something was either really happening that you thought that it would be a smart idea to take your chances in the water, which you have a very minimal chance of living, more so than being on the ship, which you definitely have a way higher chance of surviving. But
and they found the ship like run aground. It wasn't like it was sunk,
So that's the even weirder part, is that it's like you think about these ships and it's like, where do these people go,
Yeah. And they were like off the coast of the island. It wasn't like they were in the middle of the ocean. So theoretically, I mean, even if they did try to get to land, I mean, unless something fucking crazy happened, all of them wouldn't have just up and died, Yeah,
at least some of them would have made it.
Yeah. So,
unless you're in the Lake Michigan Triangle, because Lake Michigan's pretty damn huge. That might as well just be an inland sea. So, I mean, like, you're taking your chances with some rogue waves possibly if you're jumping in those waters.
Well, and, maybe that same thing happened to these guys, but it just sounds kind of fishy when you just read the quote unquote facts. But
that was kind of punny.
Kind of the last more historical Croatoan little tidbit we got. So in 1937, Amelia Earhart, who everybody knows, first woman to try to circumnavigate the globe, and she flew a Lockheed Martin model airplane, which I think is kind of interesting in light of like all the kind of conspiracies with Lockheed and Boeing and all those big boys. So just a little something to throw in there.
Talking about conspiracies, did you catch the whole thing that happened recently? I don't have any thoughts on it yet. Just
You're
because
of more specific than that.
I don't have any thoughts on it yet because I haven't really got much information on it. But the plane/helicopter collision in DC that everybody died in, like
I just saw that like on the news earlier today. So I don't know it nearly enough about it to even discuss it or have an opinion.
See, that's where I'm at. I just wanted to like put it out there that it just seems weird because with minimal information, the only thing I could think of is like how does a helicopter crash into a plane? Like, I don't understand that. I mean, obviously somebody from like air traffic control is definitely going to get fired, but like you'd figure that a helicopter would have some pretty good like range of motion, and the sky is pretty vast and open where you'd be able to see a plane. So like, it just seems really, really strange to me.
Yeah, that's a little fishy. I'll definitely have to look into that one more.
But I'm curious this is my point I was trying to get it back to is I didn't look up the model of the plane, but I'm curious if it was like a Boeing or something, for example, because there's a lot of issues with Boeing.
That seems like a crucial piece of information. Oh, and this is not at all related, but also kind of related. So, we don't really get into true crime too much on this show, but I'm like fucking obsessed with the JonBenet Ramsey story. And me and Jenny were watching this JonBenet Ramsey documentary the other day, and apparently, the company that her father, John Ramsey, like owned, worked for, whatever, was owned or bought out or something like that by like Lockheed or Boeing. I don't remember which one it was, but it was like one of those. And like when they announced, like I'd never heard this piece of information before, but I was like jumping up and down in the bed when they were talking about this, when we were watching this documentary.
Dude, that's something we could definitely bring into the show. Just throwing that out here at this point. We definitely could bring some true crime stuff in. If it like relates to conspiracies or if it relates to like occult stuff, possibly, we could definitely do some like true crime stuff.
Yeah, like the again, this is total tangent, but the two that I would be interested in doing is, again, JonBenet Ramsey or like the whole Manson thing, just because that goes in so many fucking different directions, you know?
I'm sure it'd probably get us in trouble on YouTube, but I'd love to do an episode on like the Hillary or the Clinton body count.
The kill list. Yeah,
the Clinton kill list. And just like
but
how.
We talked about that a little bit in the Chester Bennington episode.
Yeah, see, so we could definitely do it. It would mix in with things because some of those deaths, like the one I mentioned on that episode, a guy hangs himself and then shoots himself in the stomach with a shotgun. Like, okay, that's how that happens. Like, what?
So, anyway, we've gone on a bit of a tangent there, but back to Amelia Earhart, first woman tried to circumnavigate the globe. During the flight, her and her navigator, they mysteriously disappeared while they were over like the Central Pacific Ocean. And allegedly, her journal was discovered after her death. I'm not putting a whole lot of stock in because where was this journal? Was it in the plane? Was it at her house? I never saw that set in stone. But
yeah, that's what I was about to say. Where was this journal at? Because otherwise it sounds like some 9/11 type shit that, like the passports were found a couple blocks over with nothing burned. Like, we couldn't find the plane, but here's the diary.
Take the plane out of the diary. It's like a Harry Potter Horcrux type situation.
Like, where was it? That's the good question. Because if it was at home, then it would have no tie or relation to this flight to begin with. So it's it has to have had some relation to it. Like, she either made a stop somewhere and left it or something, but it's not relevant unless it was somewhere with her with this flight.
Yeah, take this one with a grain of salt. All those things, all caveats, but supposedly this was discovered after her death. And on the, whatever last page of the diary, there was like a scribbling of the word Croatoan. So take that for what you will. But anyway, that closes out the vocabulary section of the notes.
Why is it always the last page? Why can't people just write creepy messages on the first page or in a random page in the middle? Isn't that just as creepy if you have a whole blank book and you write a random page in the middle? That seems more cryptic.
No, it's got to be on the last page, man. That's way more metal.
You got to do it on page 33 or 666 of a totally blank book. Just to mess with people's heads.
That would have been a hell of a diary if it had 666 pages. But.
I mean, some of these old 1700 diaries, man, 1600 diaries, like, they didn't have nothing better to do besides journal, draw, shit like that. So some of those diaries, man, they're fucking thick.
Well, maybe that's exactly what happened.
So. Plus, I mean, in all fairness, if you were an explorer, you had a family at home, even if you die, at least you can let them know about your adventures. You gotta do a daily log. I mean, I feel like, isn't that part of like
captain's log?
Yeah, like a ship captain's thing anyways, is they have to take a daily log regardless. Like, imagine like a sailor that's been on the seas for 10 years and he's doing daily logs, bro. That's easily 666 pages after 2 years.
Getting a daily log.
Big old daily log. I mean, taking his daily log while doing the daily log. That's the way to do it.
I mean, whatever you're into.
As long as you're not receiving the daily log. Hold on tight, guys. We'll be back with that bizarre stuff you crave. But
if you would like to rock some gear for your favorite podcast or creature, hop on over to the OMM merch store for a wide range of designs with new drops regularly.
And we are back with the high strangeness. Let's get back into it.
All right, so now we're going to hit kind of some of the more supernatural, bizarre theories that are used to explain like the Roanoke colonists' disappearances. So allegedly, and this really isn't even allegedly, we know
allegedly.
This,
sorry, I missed like 3 this episode. I had to do one.
Yeah, you got to get one good one per episode. So anyway, the Croatan tribe like believed in elemental spirits, which we talk about on the show all the time.
Almost every episode.
Yep, and they said that one of these spirits took the form of a reptile, which is interesting for various reasons that you guys already know and I don't need to explain.
Reptilians in America, they've always been here.
Yeah. But anyway, this reptile spirit was said to, quote, attach itself to humans, causing them to demonstrate the demonic traits like violence, rapaciousness, and greed. And the Croatan believed that this evil reptile spirit had infected the land, which this gets back to what you were talking about earlier. And they even reported strange phenomena like birds falling out of the sky and like wildlife dropping dead for no apparent reason.
They're stealing their luge. Have we done a reptilians episode before? I don't think we have.
We have not, or I haven't.
We'll definitely have to do a reptilians episode because if we talk about them enough on here, and like for anybody that follows the whole like elite reptilian conspiracy, like this is right on fucking key for it, like exactly on key, where everybody's digging into these things from coming from like ancient Babylon, like all these ancient European societies, and maybe you need to look at one, either they're international or a little bit closer to home, that these people have been running this land, the Americas, since the natives have even been here. Like,
well, and again, we were talking a little bit about, the indigenous people of Mexico, and, all those tribes have reptile gods and spirits and things of that nature. So, yeah.
Here's something weird to think about. So they talk about how there's all these like ancient Native American stories about how everybody was underground and then they came back up, and then that's when like the New World restarted again. So whatever that disaster was, some people theorize it's the floods, but I don't necessarily think that cataclysm they're talking about for that one may have been the floods, just because if you went underground, assumably there's one open spot and everybody's flooded out and everybody's dead. So assumably there may have been something else at some point in history. Maybe it was some type of heat event, and if it was a heat event, maybe that's where all these reptilian species started to adapt from. Maybe there was a long period, because we talk about how there was multiple great cataclysms, and whenever I start diving into it, it's like you find people list a couple of them, but it doesn't seem like all of them get listed. So who knows like how far back these stories go, or how long the natives were underground for, because they talked about generations and generations of being underground. So within generations and generations, assumably other things can adapt. So I mean, maybe these reptilian beings were humanoids that were living on the surface while these Native American underground stories were happening. And then when the natives started coming up, maybe they swapped back.
Well, not to go on a total another tangent, but, everybody always talks about how nuclear technology might have like actually been rediscovered, and there's like nuclear fallout places it shouldn't be in like antiquity and stuff. Maybe that's what happened, and these people had to go underground for, years and years until all the radioactive fallout dissipated. Who knows?
And all the reptiles just slowly mutated into humanoid beings.
Yeah, maybe so.
I mean, assumably, if it was something where maybe like there was a mutation to the brain, I mean, and then depending on how much time there was on the in-between, I mean, maybe it's not necessarily the like radiation that made their bodies transform into humanoid beings, but rather if it somehow transferred their brain and made it so that they were more intelligent, then assumably they're going to find new ways to adapt into their environment, so the humanoid aspect might come afterwards.
Well, and they say, humans still have like their fucking lizard brain, so who knows?
Hey, we still have marks of our tails that we had at one point too.
So kind of jumping back into more kind of elemental spirit type stuff. The Croatan also believed in a spirit of the woods, and so this kind of gets into Fae type territory. But they said if this spirit was angered, it had the ability to transform humans into animals or trees. And this kind of goes back to something you were talking about earlier in the episode as well.
If there is a spirit like that, and it feels again like you didn't respect the land, maybe it wants you to live and be one with the land. And what's the best way of doing that? Make your ass into an animal spirit, so you have to live off the land.
Yeah. So like people who kind of entertain this theory, they suggest that the Roanoke colonists didn't like actually disappear at all, but they were transformed into part of the land, like you said.
They became what is known as modern day corn. Everybody wants to look at the old pictures of like what corn used to look like, and it was grass, and then it turned into corn. This is the exact moment. It just happened overnight because people started eating corn people.
And that's why popcorn kernels, like there's always some left at the bottom of the bowl. Like those are just the bad ones.
They look like skulls, and that's why they started making corn husk dolls. It's because they knew that they were their ancestors. Dun, dun, dun.
You heard it here first.
The corn people. Don't eat corn because you're eating your ancestors.
Our ancestors are delicious if you put butter on them.
Gotta butter them up.
So this I just kind of threw in there. There's really no evidence at all for this, but people have suggested that the Roanoke colonists could have experienced like a mass alien abduction, or also some sort of quote reality shift that banished the colonists into another realm. end quote. So I just had to throw that in there because that's, right up our alley on this show. So,
everything that happens in these triangles just gets tossed into this in-between dimension where I'm going to say the best way that I can see it in my mind is, have you ever seen the newer movie they made for Land of the Lost?
With Will Ferrell?
Yeah.
Yeah, like when he's running around in his dress shoes, that movie's fucking hilarious.
So the first area they go to where it's just a desert and it just has all these random gas stations, cars, planes, all that shit just thrown in because it's in this in-between reality dimension. That's wherever all these things are at. Amelia Earhart is hanging out with the Roanoke colonists, and time doesn't exist in that dimension. So as soon as you enter it, it's almost just like a box of isolation where no time gets altered. You are the age and everything that you were when you first entered this place. And Amelia Earhart, everybody that's disappeared into any of these triangles, all the missing 411 people, they're all just hanging out in this, they're
in the upside down.
Yeah, they're in the land of the lost dimension. I'd like to say the upside down, but I feel like there would be... They got to have to throw into it, instead of it just being a mirror, it's just a bunch of random places that these people came from, just kind of thrown in sand sideways.
Hey, that's as good a theory as any, I suppose.
But then they got to look out for the sandworms, because that's where Dune comes from.
Yeah, the Mongolian sandworms, which we also talked about on a recent episode. Go check that one out.
That's where all
Shameless plugs.
They go in and out into dimensions. That's where they go when they go back under the sand, is this other dimension to fucking eat Amelia Earhart in the Roanoke colonists.
You heard it here first. All right, so kind of rounding everything out, we're going to just kind of breeze through some miscellaneous and conclusions. So interest in the whole Roanoke colony thing was renewed in 1834 when a former U.S. Secretary of the Navy and the founder of the Naval Academy, George Bancroft, published a book titled A History of the United States. And in this book, he talked a lot about Roanoke and the colonists, and he kind of portrayed them as, quote, foundational figures in American culture. And he drew a lot of attention to the fact that Virginia Dare was, this first English child born in the Americas. So that's where a lot of the Virginia Dare fervor comes from, is from this guy's book. So also, since 1937 in Manteo, North Carolina, there's been this outdoor play conducted called The Lost Colony. And the play is staged in this huge outdoor amphitheater that actually sits either right on or very close to the site of the original Roanoke colony. So, like I said, this has gone on for decades. More than 4 million people have seen this since it started. It's, kind of a big deal, even to people who aren't into weird stuff like this.
Is the tree still there that says Croatoan on it?
No, but they've got a fake one for the show.
That's so dumb, bro. They should have left that tree forever and then just put a thing around it, because it'd probably be pretty high up at this point.
Yeah, but I'm sure people didn't think about that kind of shit back then,
Dude, just to throw in a crazy theory on this one. So who was the grandfather or whatever that came?
John White.
John White. Okay, so what if the expedition never even made it in the first place? They all died, and this guy wanted to have continued funding, so he just pretended what happened to the colonists, so that he never looked like he just totally had a failed colony. What if they never even made it there in the first place, and that's why it looked like it was half built, is because it was a handful of guys trying to put this facade together. They actually made an established colony because they didn't want to go and tell the queen that they lost her money, essentially. So they just played off this whole thing oh yeah, see, we made it, we started establishing it, all the people disappeared, we don't know what the fuck happened, but if you give us some more funding, we can keep trying to make you some more colonies. It must have been the natives, instead of just being oh, we fucked up.
Those rascally natives. They're just a bunch of weasels.
That's a really out there theory, but it does kind of seem somewhat logical, though.
That's really no more out there than the colony was specifically set up for failure because of a Protestant versus Catholic battle royale,
Because assumably, if you got ships, you got all these people, you got all these supplies and stuff like that from the queen, and then you just bombed your fucking mission, then you can't go back and pretend you didn't get anything. You at least have to pretend there was a problem that was out of your control.
Well, and basically, this whole thing was just one failure after the next. Nothing about this whole endeavor was remotely successful,
Did this guy ever end up later on having successful ventures?
The John White?
Yeah.
No, he died like pretty soon after all this happened, within like 2 or 3 years, I think. So like once he got back to England, he was like trying to, like you said, drum up funding for another expedition. And because of the ongoing wars and shit, he could never get the funding, and he died before he could get back.
So like I said, maybe he simply staged it because he knew that if he came back with a failed mission, he was never going to get more funding again.
Yeah. But you know, the funny thing about it is no matter what way you slice it, it was failed.
Yeah. Regardless, was it a failed cover up or was it just failed in general, naturally?
Yeah. Was it incompetence or stupidity? One of the two. So last couple little odds and ends here. We talked about this a little bit. The 6th season of American Horror Story is subtitled Roanoke, and it takes a lot of loose, I'll say, inspiration from the whole Lost Colony thing.
Almost as loose as Texas Chainsaw Massacre and Ed Gein. Like,
yeah. Like, this was the season of American Horror Story where I officially quit watching. Like, I was so pumped up for this one for obvious reasons, and then when I saw it, I was like, "Nah, man, I'm out now." Like,
honestly, just not to side tangent too much, but the peak of that show was Asylum. And the one with the carnival.
Freak Show.
Freak Show.
Probably my favorite one. The witch one is pretty good too.
But that was like the epitome, and then it seems like everything else just kind of... Especially that season with Lady Gaga in the hotel. Like, that one was probably the biggest shit season.
I liked that one better than the Roanoke one. But
honestly, I watched both of those seasons, and then I was done after that. I think I made it like... I started watching the one with Lady Gaga, and I had to finish it. So I like made it to the end of that, and then I was like, all right, I'm done.
Yeah, I had high hopes for the Roanoke one, and it did not deliver. So there's so many like directions you could have gone with this story, obviously, and done some really cool things, and they did literally none of those things.
The layer of like, oh, we're filming a documentary, and then the actual stuff happening.
Like a documentary within a documentary within a documentary.
Like, I fucking hate when they do shit like that. Like, I'm not a big fan. Like, certain films you have to do from that perspective, and I get that. Like Blair Witch, perfect way to do it. Bluff Creek, you couldn't have done that any other way. But like, for the most part, if you have an option and that was never in your style of filming in the first place, like, fuck off with that.
Well, I mean, not hating on him, because I mean, he does some good stuff and he's very successful. But Ryan Murphy, the guy who's like in charge of Horror Story, like sometimes he just gets a little too cute for his own good, I feel like, and he just needs to be reined in a little bit. He got a big George Lucas-itis.
That show, it started off very horror aspect. Like I said, Asylum is probably my all-time favorite season, but I feel like it turned into a chick show. You know, like it seemed like it was pretty universal, that both sides could really enjoy it. But then it just started really just turning into a girl show where I feel like they lost like most of their guy viewers on it.
Yeah, I don't disagree with that. But anyway, that's been another sufficient tangent. We've been all over the map today.
I will throw in though that witch season. You said that you weren't a fan of that one?
No, I liked that one.
Oh, the one... Are you talking about the one where it had, like, Stevie Nicks in it?
Yeah.
Oh, I wasn't a fan of that one. That's what I was going to say. I wasn't a fan of that.
That was pretty good. The, like, New Orleans one?
I like the more brutal American Horror Story. Not so much the, like, woo, American Horror Story, you know?
You like your horror to not be lighthearted?
Yeah, I like the twisted, mind-bending concepts, like I said, with Asylum, that this woman's trying to, like, report on shit, and she gets, like, trapped in there and shit.
People fucking in gimp suits. That's what you want.
I want the fucked up shit. It's American Horror Story. I don't want American, Horror Story?
Either way. Why not both?
Sure, why not? Hold that thought. We'll be right back after this brief commercial break. And we are back to the show. So let's hop right in.
All right. So the last little tidbit I'll throw in before we kind of get into conclusions, and this really has nothing to do with much of anything, but I just thought I'd throw it in there. So for you longtime listeners, you've probably heard me tell a little bit of my story either on this show or other shows about kind of some of the weird stuff that happened around where I grew up. So the national forest around where I grew up that I talk about in my story is the Croatan National Forest. So again, doesn't really have anything to do with anything, but I just thought I'd throw that in there.
Hey, maybe that's why there was always random choppers. They were seeing these animal spirits just running through the woods, and they were like, track them down, where do they go? And they just...
I don't fucking doubt that at all.
Disappear into a mist.
So anyway, we're going a little long tonight, but we've gone on some tangents, so that's okay.
It's okay. It's our first deep dive in a while, so we of course had to go a little bit long on these because this is like our bread and butter, man.
So rounding all this out, we'll do some conclusions. So the Lost Colony has been called the Area 51 of colonial history, which I thought was kind of a fun quote. But I've always, like we've talked about throughout this show, I've always found it kind of odd that this was considered such a big mystery. Like, to me, it's totally like an Occam's razor situation. You know, sometimes the simplest solution is the correct one. And I just see no way that it's not some combination of the colonists either died of natural causes or were murdered, and like others moved and assimilated with local tribes. Like, I mean, that just seems so straightforward to me. I don't know why this is considered such a mystery.
Well, hear me out. This is my end all be all theory on, like, if I had to put money on something, this is what I would assume. I would assume that there was some type of ambush at one point. And again, either one, people got killed off, or two, they assimilated into the groups or the tribes that are already in the area. And I think the whole Croatoan thing carved into a tree. So Native American language was a spoken language. It wasn't they didn't have like characters for stuff. Like when we try to write stuff out, like there's not actual native spelling for 90% of the words that you find, which is why you'll look up like a Native American folklore creature and find 10 different fucking spellings for it. It's because there wasn't an established spelling. So knowing that, the Croatoan, they come in, they ambush these people. They're like, we want to leave our mark, and so that they know who did this. So they're trying to write the name of their tribe and what they're assuming would be English characters. Again, typo. They just put an extra letter in there because they didn't have spelling for their words to begin with. So they just spelt it how they would assume that the English would be able to read it and understand who was there. That's my theory. I think that there was an ambush and they went to go write Croatoan on the tree, and they just added an extra letter in there. And then
like,
the other
Croatoan was here.
Yeah, pretty much. Just pretty much marking, like, this is the tribe who did it. Like, they wanted to leave their mark because, I mean, you're looking at these old groups, usually when there'd be an ambush, like, people wanted to leave their mark on places. Like, Vikings, they would burn down the entire town, steal all the fucking gold. Like, that's how you knew the Vikings were there. They would burn everything and take all the fucking gold. So, you know, when you conquer a group, you know, you want to leave your mark. So, I mean, it doesn't seem far off for them to say that, like, they wanted the English to know that they did it so that they can say, like, come and fuck with us. Like, we took out this group, we'll take out another one.
Yeah. I mean, I think that's very, very possible. And like I said, I think it's some combination of those two things, like whatever the percentages are, like how many of them got killed versus however many of them assimilated. I don't know. Doesn't really matter, but that's where I fall on it. But one last little thing I did want to throw in, another shout out to Kevin. When we were doing our Conspiracy Tuesday episode, in some of his research, he said he came across this idea that this quote unquote mystery aspect and of the disappearance was kind of perpetuated by the English and royalty and all that to hide the fact that, like, these, you know, white European colonists intermingled with the savage natives. So I thought that was kind of interesting. I can't take credit for that one. Want to definitely give a shout out to him, but something I thought was cool and worth mentioning.
I mean, if you think about it from that aspect too, say that this tribe was established, they, you know, kind of had their treaties going and stuff like that. They did start intermingling with these tribes, and this was the first established English tribe. You know, it would totally make sense that if they heard that they were intermingling with them, they wanted to keep that pure English blood, that maybe they sent another group, or there was another group later on that they sent in to slaughter their own people so that they could pretend like it never existed in the first place. Because that definitely seems like an act that a queen at the time would possibly do, because they were very particular about making sure that their nationality stayed pure. So if they heard that their first colony was already breeding, intermingling with the natives, the next group they send out, they said, take them out. We're not dealing with them. And you guys stay separate.
Yeah, that just totally seems par for the course for, you know, this kind of shit. It's way better to be fucking your cousin to keep the bloodline pure than fucking the savages. So anyway, I thought that's cool. I think that's a really neat spin on it and a really cool theory, and just makes a lot of sense.
And I mean, that could also be kind of where a lot of these stories kind of come in, like the white deer thing too, is because they were trying to stir up fear about mingling with the natives, basically saying that, like, in a weird way, because obviously they came over to America for religious freedom, so to speak, that they're saying that if you mix with these people, these pagan aspects are going to start coming into your worldview. So, I mean, maybe that whole story talking about Virginia Dare was intended...
A cautionary tale?
Yeah, it was intended as a cautionary tale, basically saying, don't mess with the natives, otherwise their spiritual beliefs will come upon you.
And you're going to be turned into a fucking deer.
Exactly. I mean, that almost seems more... I don't know, man. Now I'm sitting on the fence between those two. Did they intentionally try to take out their own group because they were intermingling and then set up these stories to scare people away from it in the future? Or did the Croatoan come and take them all out and try to leave their mark on a tree that they were the ones that did it? Like, and I'm kind of sitting on the fence between those two. They both seem very logical.
No, I agree. And I think this would be a cool one for people to kind of chime in and let us know what they think. There's some different ways you can go with this one, and I think each one of them is very valid and very possible. So you listeners out there, shoot us some messages. Let us know what you guys think about this. Maybe this is something we can kind of readdress in one of our Bizarre Inquiries episodes.
Yeah, we could definitely do that. I mean, I don't know. Maybe we could probably start doing some more of these, like, older folklore-y ghost stories too. Like, we can start talking about shipwrecks and stuff like that too. So, I mean, just a shout out to people out there. If you guys enjoy these kind of half history, half mystery ones, I'm sure that we can find a lot more of these to do to kind of bring more content into the fold for you guys. So we're not just always talking about cryptids or aliens.
Yeah, we got to mix it up a little bit for you guys. Hold on tight, guys. This is our last ad break. But if you've got some free time, don't forget to check out the awesome friends of the show, I Know Squatch, Snarly Yow Natural Products, Crypto Teology, and Big Ape Threads.
And our other friends with affiliate links, Dimension Devices, Oregon-ite, and Sticker Mule, with additional discounts and credits available down in the show notes. And we are back, so let's hop right in.
With that's basically all I got. So Shayn, if you don't have anything else, tell all the listeners out there how they can get up with us if they want to do so.
Number one, you guys can email us at bizarreencounters@outlook.com. Or you guys can get a hold of us through social media. Instagram and Facebook are the ones that we're the most active on. Or you guys can also get a hold of us through the submission form, which is available on our link tree. Right up at the top, it says to contact us. And the last way is by calling or texting the hotline number. That number is 313-364-1551. And with that one, you guys can call in encounters. You guys can call in opinions that you guys want to say on the show. You guys can even call in and give shout outs to people if you guys want. It comes in, it records onto my phone. So we can definitely play them back on the show. And again, if you guys want to give shout outs, whatever, you can definitely do that. Or you can even type it out. We can read it on the show. So just to kind of expand the reach of what we can do with that hotline.
And once again, all this shit that we've mentioned is in the link tree in the show description.
And just like the story of the Lost Roanoke colony, we always keep it bizarre. We like to talk about bizarre things. And guys, don't forget to always yourselves stay bizarre. Bizarre. Bizarre.
Popcorn is cannibalism?